The breaking point. At 48 years old, Rebecca Morgan stood in her kitchen at 3 a.m., flour covering her hands, tears streaming down her face. Her children were gone. Her marriage was over. Her savings account showed $847. This wasn't the kitchen she'd known for 26 years. That kitchen, with its granite countertops and professional appliances, belonged to her old life. This kitchen was cramped, with cheap laminate countertops peeling at the corners. This was the kitchen of a woman who'd lost everything. What happened next would surprise everyone who thought her life was over. This is the story of how a middle-aged woman, broken by divorce and financial ruin, turned her grandmother's recipes into a business that now generates over $800,000 in annual revenue and employs 23 people. But getting there required more strength than she ever knew she had. Rebecca Morgan had done everything right, or so she thought. She met David Morgan at 22, fresh out of college. He was 25, confident and charming. He had a plan. She said yes when he proposed after 8 months of dating. For 26 years, she kept that promise with everything she had. They bought their first house in suburban Connecticut when she was 24. Rebecca painted the nursery herself. Their daughter, Emma, was born 9 months later. Rebecca had been working as an administrative assistant at a law firm. She was good at her job. Organized, efficient, the person everyone came to when they needed something done right. But when Emma arrived, David sat her down with a calculator. "It doesn't make financial sense," he explained. "Daycare costs versus her salary. And besides, don't you want to be home with her?" Rebecca did want to be home with Emma, but she also wanted to keep working. However, exhausted and overwhelmed with a newborn, she agreed. So she quit. Their son, James, came 3 years later. They moved to a bigger house. 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a backyard big enough for a swing set and a garden. Rebecca threw herself into motherhood and homemaking with the same efficiency she'd brought to her office job. Color-coded calendars. Meal plans every week. Volunteer coordinator for the PTA. The house that hosted neighborhood barbecues and book clubs and holiday parties. Their home became known as the place with the best food. Rebecca would spend days preparing for parties. Her grandmother's recipes, written in faded ink in a stained notebook, became legendary. The cinnamon rolls, the focaccia, the biscotti that David's colleagues would request by name. "You should open a restaurant," someone would always joke. Rebecca would laugh and pour more wine, never admitting that sometimes late at night, she wondered what her life might have looked like with different choices. The cracks started small. So small she could pretend they weren't there. David working later. Always later. Coming home after the kids were in bed. Smelling of cologne and something Rebecca couldn't identify. He was stressed, he said. The company was expanding. Rebecca believed him because the alternative was too frightening. He stopped coming to Emma's soccer games. Miss James's school plays. Their conversations became about logistics. Who picks up who? What's for dinner? When are the bills due? Rebecca told herself it was normal. Marriage wasn't a romance novel. This was what long-term relationships looked like. Comfortable. Predictable. Sometimes distant but stable. Then Emma left for college. Rebecca stood in her daughter's empty bedroom and felt the first real tremor of panic. James would leave in 2 years. Then what? She tried to talk to David about it. About feeling lost. About needing to figure out what came next. He barely looked up from his laptop. You could volunteer more. Join a gym. That was the moment Rebecca realized she was invisible to her own husband. She started paying attention. The credit card statements David always handled. The phone calls in another room. The weekend golf trips with people she'd never met. One evening while David was in the shower, his phone buzzed. A text message lit up the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I love you." From someone named Ashley. Rebecca's hands shook as she picked up the phone. She knew his passcode. The messages went back 2 years. Hundreds of them. I love yous and miss yous and plans made. A whole relationship parallel to their marriage. Rebecca sat on the edge of their bed and felt her entire world reorganize. Everything she'd believed, every choice she'd made, every sacrifice she'd convinced herself was worth it, suddenly appeared in a different light. She wasn't standing on solid ground. She'd been standing on ice about to break. She could have confronted him that night, screamed, thrown the phone, demanded explanations. Instead, she carefully placed the phone back and went downstairs. She sat in her perfect kitchen and felt absolutely nothing. Sometimes trauma doesn't hit all at once. Sometimes your body protects you by going numb, shutting down, letting you function on autopilot while something essential inside you breaks. 3 weeks later, David came to her. March 15, 2019. 3 weeks after Rebecca's 48th birthday, a birthday he'd forgotten. He came home early, asked her to sit down, then told her everything she already knew but had been too paralyzed to confront. He was leaving. He'd fallen in love with someone else. He was sorry, but he couldn't live a lie anymore. The paperwork was already filed. Rebecca sat on their leather couch and listened to her husband dismantle their life with clinical efficiency. "You'll be fine," he said absently. "You're smart, capable. You'll figure it out." Then he left. Just walked out with a suitcase he'd packed that morning. And Rebecca sat in that house, surrounded by 26 years of accumulated life, and realized she had no idea who she was without it. The darkness. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. 8 months of lawyers billing $350 an hour to argue about wedding china and furniture. When it was over, Rebecca walked away with half the equity from the house sale, $98,000 after legal fees. A used Honda Civic. Spousal support of $2,100 per month for exactly 3 years. And half of their joint savings, $14,000. At 48 years old, Rebecca Morgan was starting over with less than $120,000 to her name and no income. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The building was called Riverside Gardens, though there was no river and the gardens were struggling patches of grass. Cost $1,400 a month. With utilities, her monthly expenses were roughly $1,800. Her spousal support covered that, but barely. And in 3 years it would disappear entirely. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an 82-year-old widow, knocked on her door the first week with a casserole. "Starting over is hard," Mrs. Chen said simply. "But you're stronger than you think you are." Rebecca thanked her, but she didn't believe it. Not yet. The first 6 months in that apartment were the darkest of Rebecca's life. She applied for jobs. Office manager, administrative assistant, receptionist, customer service representative. She sent out 47 applications in the first month. She received 12 automated rejection emails. The rest, complete silence. The few interviews she managed to secure were humiliating. One interviewer, a woman barely 30 years old, looked at Rebecca's resume and frowned. "That's quite a gap," she said. "What have you been doing all this time?" Rebecca wanted to say she'd been raising 2 humans from infancy to adulthood, managing a household budget, coordinating schedules, organizing events for 50 people, keeping an entire family functioning. Instead, she smiled and said, "I was a stay-at-home mother." The interviewer nodded with thinly veiled pity. "I see. And you think you can handle the fast-paced environment of a modern office?" Rebecca left that interview feeling smaller than she'd ever felt. She sat in her car in the parking lot and called Emma. "How did it go?" her daughter asked hopefully. "Great," Rebecca lied. "Really great." The rejections piled up. Week after week. The automated emails said the same thing. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." Translation: "You're too old. Your skills are outdated. That gap in your resume is a red flag. We don't want you." Rebecca started spending entire days in her apartment without showering, scrolling through job listings with decreasing hope. She ate cereal for dinner. She watched television shows she didn't care about. She avoided phone calls from her children because she didn't want to admit how badly she was failing. The social isolation was almost worse than the financial stress. Her married friends slowly drifted away. The invitations stopped coming. The text messages became less frequent. She made them uncomfortable, a reminder that marriages could end, that they too could end up alone in a cheap apartment at 48. One former friend, Linda, ran into her at the grocery store. They'd known each other for 15 years. "Oh my God, Rebecca! How are you?" "I'm okay," Rebecca said automatically. "We should get coffee sometime," Linda said, already backing away. They never did. Rebecca stopped going to that grocery store. On a particularly bad night in November, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Rebecca found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. She'd lost weight, but not in a healthy way. Her face was gaunt. Her eyes had dark circles. Her hair, once carefully colored and styled, was growing out gray at the roots. She looked exhausted, defeated. "Well, is this it?" she whispered to her reflection. "Is this all there is?" At 48, was her life essentially over? Would she spend the next 30 or 40 years just existing, barely surviving, waiting for what? Social security. Death. The thought was so bleak, so utterly hopeless, that Rebecca sank down to sit on the edge of her bathtub and started to cry. Her phone buzzed. Text from Emma. "Thinking about you, Mom. Miss your cinnamon rolls. Remember when you used to make them every Sunday? The house smelled so good. Love you." Rebecca stared at that text for a long time. Cinnamon rolls. She hadn't made them in over a year. But suddenly she could smell them. Could feel the dough under her hands. Could see her grandmother, Elena, standing at her old kitchen counter, teaching a young Rebecca how to roll the dough just right. "Gentle," Elena would say in her thick Italian accent. "You treat the dough like you treat people. With care. With love. Then it gives you something beautiful." Rebecca had learned to bake from her grandmother. Every Sunday morning of her childhood, she'd wake to the smell of fresh bread. Elena would let her help, teaching her the old family recipes, the ones passed down through generations. "Food is love," Elena would say. "You feed people, you feed their souls." That night, Rebecca dug through unpacked boxes until she found it. Her grandmother's recipe notebook. Stained with flour and oil. Pages yellowed with age. Elena had died 12 years ago, but her handwriting was still there, mixing English and Italian. The next morning, Rebecca went to the grocery store with $40, carefully budgeting every item. She came home and started baking. Cinnamon rolls. The ones Emma remembered. Her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. The feel of the dough, the way it needed to be kneaded just enough. Her small apartment filled with warmth and the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar. For the first time in months, Rebecca felt something other than emptiness. She felt purpose. When the rolls came out golden and perfect, Rebecca sat at her small table and cried. But these weren't tears of despair. For the first time in months, she'd created something tangible and real and good. Mrs. Chen knocked on her door, drawn by the smell. "What are you making?" the older woman asked, her eyes bright. Rebecca, still in her flour-dusted apron, tears still on her cheeks, offered her a cinnamon roll. Mrs. Chen took one bite and closed her eyes. She chewed slowly, deliberately. "These," she said finally, "these are extraordinary." Rebecca laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "Thank you, but you could sell these," Mrs. Chen interrupted. Rebecca laughed again, less certainly. "Who would buy cinnamon rolls from me?" "Everyone," Mrs. Chen said simply. "There's a farmer's market every Saturday in the town square. My late husband used to sell his tomatoes there for 20 years. You should try." Rebecca was already shaking her head. "I can't. I've never done anything like that. I wouldn't even know where to start." Mrs. Chen fixed her with that sharp gaze. "You know how to start. You put one foot in front of the other. You bake. Sell. You see what happens. But what if I fail? What if you succeed?" Mrs. Chen countered. "Either way, at least you'll be trying." And trying is better than slowly disappearing in this apartment. The words hit Rebecca like cold water. Is that what she'd been doing? Slowly disappearing. After Mrs. Chen left, Rebecca sat with those cinnamon rolls and that question. She thought about her children living their lives. She thought about her grandmother, who'd immigrated to a new country at 19 with nothing but her recipes and her determination. She thought about the woman in the bathroom mirror, the one who'd whispered, "Is this it?" And she thought maybe not. The first step. The idea of selling her baking at a farmer's market terrified Rebecca for exactly 37 different reasons she could list. She wasn't a business person. She had no experience with sales. She'd never sold anything in her life except Girl Scout cookies for Emma. What if nobody bought anything? What if people hated them? What if she made a fool of herself in front of an entire town? But the alternative, sitting in her apartment watching her savings dwindle while sending out resumes into the void, was worse. At least this was action. At least this was trying. Rebecca spent 3 days researching. She went to the farmer's market as a customer, walking through slowly, observing. She noted what vendors did that worked. The ones with the longest lines. The ones with the best displays. She took photos on her phone. She went to the library and checked out books on small business and food sales. She watched YouTube videos about farmers' market strategies. She learned about health department regulations and food handlers' licenses. There were permits required, insurance needed, rules about ingredients and labeling. It was overwhelming. Every answer led to 3 more questions. But for the first time in months, Rebecca's brain was engaged. She was solving problems. She was learning. She was becoming something other than a woman drowning in her own despair. She registered for the farmer's market. The fee was $25 per week. Mrs. Chen insisted on lending her the first week's fee. "You'll pay me back," the older woman said. "With interest. In cinnamon rolls." Rebecca got her food handler's license through an online course that cost $15. She filled out paperwork for a temporary business permit. She bought insurance that covered food sales, $47 a month that made her stomach hurt. She spent $200 from her savings on supplies. Plastic containers with lids. Flour and sugar and butter in bulk. Labels she printed at home and cut by hand. She designed a simple logo, Nana's Kitchen, in a script font, with a small rolling pin illustration. Her grandmother's nickname. Her grandmother's recipes. Felt right. Rebecca spent 2 weeks perfecting her process. She baked batch after batch, adjusting timing and temperature for her cheap apartment oven. She tested different container sizes. She tried various ways of keeping the rolls fresh. She experimented with pricing. She brought samples to Mrs. Chen, who gave brutally honest feedback. This one too dry. This one good. This one perfect. Emma called one night while Rebecca was covered in flour at 11 p.m. "Mom, what are you doing?" Emma asked, hearing the mixer in the background. "I'm starting a business," Rebecca said, and hearing herself say it out loud made it feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. There was a pause. Then Emma's voice, small and hopeful. "Really? Really?" Rebecca confirmed. "I'm going to sell my cinnamon rolls at the farmer's market." "Mom, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you." Rebecca had to sit down. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of her? "I haven't sold anything yet," Rebecca said. "I might completely fail. Or you might succeed," Emma countered. "Either way, you're trying. That takes guts." Friday night before her first market, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She got up at midnight and started baking. 3 dozen cinnamon rolls. She worked through the night. Mix dough. Let rise. Roll out. Fill. Roll up. Second rise. Bake. Pull. Package. Label. By 5 a.m., she had 36 perfect cinnamon rolls in their containers, stacked neatly on her counter. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, threatening rain. Rebecca loaded everything into her Honda Civic, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the containers. She drove to the town square at 6 a.m. The parking lot was already full of trucks and vans, seasoned vendors who clearly did this every week. They had professional canopies and elaborate displays and that comfortable efficiency that comes with experience. Rebecca, with her card table and homemade sign, felt like a child playing business. She found her assigned spot, location C7, at the end of a row. Not prime real estate, not near the main entrance, but a spot nonetheless. She set up slowly, watching other vendors as they worked. Her hands were still shaking. Her table looked sad and amateur. Her stack of 36 cinnamon rolls suddenly seemed both impossibly optimistic and pathetically small. She wanted to leave. But she'd paid the $25 vendor fee. And she'd promised Mrs. Chen she'd try. So she stayed. The market opened at 8 a.m. For the first hour, people walked past. They glanced at her table. Some slowed down, drawn by the smell. But nobody stopped. Rebecca watched vendors around her making sales, chatting easily with customers, counting cash. She stood behind her table, trying to smile, trying to look confident, feeling like she was slowly dying inside. At 9:15 a.m., she'd sold nothing. Zero. Her cash box sat empty except for the change bills. Her 36 cinnamon rolls sat untouched. Rebecca started doing the math. $25 vendor fee. $80 in ingredients. $15 in containers. She was already in the hole $120. This was a mistake. A stupid, expensive mistake. She thought about packing up, going home, never coming back, adding this to her growing list of failures. Then a woman in her 60s stopped at her table. She had gray hair pulled back in a loose bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She picked up one of Rebecca's containers, reading the label carefully. "Are these homemade?" she asked. "Yes," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's my grandmother's recipe. She was Italian. She taught me to bake when I was young." The woman looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, in a way that made Rebecca feel seen for the first time in months. "How much?" the woman asked. Rebecca's mind went blank. She'd decided on $8, but suddenly that seemed like too much. $8, she said anyway. The woman pulled out her wallet and handed Rebecca a $10 bill. "Keep the change. They smell amazing." Rebecca's hands shook as she took the money. Her first sale. Her first customer. Her first proof that maybe this wasn't completely insane. "Thank you," Rebecca managed. "Thank you so much." The woman smiled. "Good luck with your business, dear. I have a feeling you're going to do very well." That woman's name was Patricia, and she would change everything. Patricia took those cinnamon rolls to her book club that afternoon. 15 women who'd been meeting every Saturday for 12 years. They had their usual wine and cheese, but Patricia brought Rebecca's cinnamon rolls for dessert. The response was unanimous. Where did she get these? Who made them? Could they order more? By Sunday morning, Rebecca had 5 missed calls and a dozen text messages. People wanted to place orders. Real orders. For parties. For office meetings. For gifts. Rebecca stood in her kitchen, staring at her phone, barely believing what she was seeing. She'd sold 14 containers at the farmer's market. Now she had orders for over 40 rolls. Rebecca called Emma, her voice shaking. "It's working," she said. "Mom, it's actually working." The next Saturday, Rebecca brought 50 rolls to the market. She sold out by 10 a.m. The Saturday after that, 75 rolls. Sold out by 11. People started showing up specifically for her. They'd line up before the market officially opened. They'd ask when she'd be there next. They'd place advance orders. By the end of the first month, Rebecca had made $1,847 in sales. After subtracting ingredients, permits, market fees, gas and supplies, her profit was $623. It wasn't much. It wasn't even minimum wage for the hours she'd worked. But it was hers. She'd earned it. She'd created something from nothing. Rebecca took that $623 and cried. Not from sadness. From something that felt like vindication. Scaling up. But success brought new problems Rebecca hadn't anticipated. Her apartment oven could only bake one tray of rolls at a time. Each batch took 25 minutes. She was running the oven 12 to 14 hours a day, and she still couldn't keep up with demand. She was turning down orders because she physically couldn't produce more. Her kitchen was overtaken by cooling racks and mixing bowls. She had flour in her hair permanently. She smelled like cinnamon and yeast no matter how many showers she took. Her back ached from hours of standing and kneading. She was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. She was exhausted in a way she'd never been, even with newborn babies. One night, 3 months into her business, surrounded by cooling racks that covered every surface of her small apartment, Rebecca broke down crying. Her phone rang. It was James. "Mom, you okay?" Rebecca tried to stop crying, failed completely. "I don't know if I can do this. Too much. I'm overwhelmed." "But you're doing it," James said gently. "You're actually doing it. Do you know how amazing that is? Emma and I are so proud of you. Our mom, who started over at 48 and built something real." After they hung up, Rebecca looked around her chaotic kitchen. She was exhausted. She was overwhelmed. But she wasn't going to quit. Not now. 4 months into her business, Rebecca made a decision that terrified her. She would take out a small business loan. She created a real business plan. She researched commercial kitchens. She calculated what she'd need to increase capacity. The number was $15,000. She met with a bank officer, a stern-looking man in his 50s who reviewed her application with skepticism. "You have no business experience," he noted. "I have 26 years of project management experience," Rebecca countered. "I just called it running a household." She showed him her order book, her customer testimonials, her financial projections that she'd taught herself to create using YouTube videos and library books. 3 weeks later, she got approved for $15,000. Rebecca rented space in a commercial kitchen, a shared facility where small food businesses could operate legally. She bought a commercial mixer, professional baking sheets, proper packaging. At 49 years old, Rebecca Morgan became a real business owner. It wasn't easy. There were weeks when she couldn't pay herself. Equipment broke down. A batch of 200 rolls burned when the oven sensor failed. She lost a day of production and $230 in ingredients. The health inspector showed up unannounced and found minor violations. Food stored at incorrect temperature. Inadequate hand-washing signage. She had 48 hours to fix everything or lose her license. Rebecca spent those 48 hours in absolute panic, fixing every problem, documenting every correction, praying it would be enough. The inspector returned, checked everything, and reluctantly approved her. One particularly difficult month, 8 months into the commercial kitchen, Rebecca was behind on everything. Her loan payment, her rent, her credit card bills. Her employees' payroll was due, and she didn't have the money. She sat in her car outside the commercial kitchen at 2 a.m., looking at her account balance. $224. She wondered if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Should she close the business? Find a regular job? Admit defeat? Then her phone buzzed. An email from a large corporate client. They wanted baked goods for their weekly meetings. 200 items per week. $2,400 per week. $9,600 per month in guaranteed income. Rebecca read that email 3 times to make sure it was real. She responded immediately. Absolutely yes. She went inside and started baking, tears of relief streaming down her face. She paid her employees on time. She caught up on rent. She made her loan payment with 2 days to spare. This was the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. Terror and triumph. Failure and resurrection. The constant edge between collapse and success. Rebecca was learning to handle it. As demand grew, Rebecca couldn't do everything alone anymore. She hired her first employee, a single mother named Keisha who needed flexible hours and a second chance. Then Carmen, a 58-year-old woman who'd been laid off from her factory job. Then Marcus, a young man fresh out of culinary school who couldn't find work. Rebecca created the kind of workplace she'd wished existed for her. Flexible, supportive, built on second chances. Under Marcus's influence, Nana's kitchen expanded beyond cinnamon rolls. They added her grandmother's biscotti, then her focaccia bread, then seasonal items like pumpkin rolls and panettone. Each product carried a story. Each recipe came from Elena's notebook. Each item felt like honoring her grandmother's legacy while building Rebecca's future. Revenue grew from $2,000 a month in her apartment to $15,000 in the commercial kitchen to $30,000 6 months after that. 1 year after signing the commercial kitchen lease, Rebecca looked at her numbers in disbelief. $180,000 in annual revenue. 3 employees. Contracts with corporate offices, coffee shops, and grocery stores. After all expenses, she'd netted $42,000 in profit. It wasn't the 6-figure income David had made, but it was hers. She'd built it from nothing. But Rebecca had a new dream forming. She wanted her own space. A real storefront where customers could come, smell the baking, buy products directly. She found a perfect space on Main Street. 1,200 square feet. It had a commercial kitchen in the back and a cozy retail space in the front. The rent was $2,800 a month. The build-out would cost another $30,000. She went back to the bank. The loan officer looked at her new business plan and almost smiled. "You know, Ms. Morgan, when you first came in here, I didn't think you'd make it 6 months." "I know," Rebecca said. "I'm glad I was wrong. Let's talk about your loan." 2.5 years after Rebecca Morgan stood in her kitchen at 48 years old, broken and afraid, she stood in a different kitchen entirely. Her kitchen, her storefront, her business. Nana's Kitchen opened on a Saturday morning in October. Mrs. Chen arrived first with flowers from her garden. I told you that you were stronger than you thought." Then Patricia arrived with her entire book club. Then customers from the farmers' market days. Then corporate clients. Then strangers drawn by the smell and word of mouth. By noon there was a line out the door. Today, 3 years after that opening, Nana's Kitchen serves 300 customers per week. The wholesale business supplies 40 locations across 3 states. Annual revenue exceeds $800,000. Rebecca employs 23 people, most of them women over 40 who came to her with stories similar to her own. Last week, a 62-year-old woman came in, recently divorced, asking if Rebecca was hiring. "I don't have any experience," the woman said, her voice shaking. "But I need to start over." Rebecca hired her on the spot. Then she told her the truth. 3 years ago I was you. Standing in my apartment, terrified and alone, thinking my life was over. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. And so is yours. Emma and James visit regularly now. They bring their friends. They brag about their mom's business. They tell Rebecca they're proud of her, and she finally, fully believes them. Mrs. Chen is 85 now. Rebecca visits her every Sunday with fresh pastries. Rebecca thinks about this often. The skills she thought were worthless were actually essential preparation. 26 years managing a household taught her operations. Volunteering taught her people management. Cooking taught her about quality and consistency. The divorce didn't end her life. It freed her to discover what that life could become. If you asked Rebecca what she's learned, she'd tell you that starting over isn't about returning to who you were. It's about discovering who you can become. That 48 isn't too late. Neither is 50 or 60 or 70. She'd tell you that the skills society undervalues, the work of caregiving and homemaking, are actually powerful. They translate. They matter. And she'd tell you that you don't need to see the whole path forward. You just need to take one step, then another, then another. The path reveals itself as you walk it. Rebecca Morgan stood in her kitchen at 48 years old, broken and afraid, and chose to bake. She didn't know that choice would lead here. She couldn't see the path forward. She just took one small step, then another, then another. And that's really the secret. You don't need to see the whole staircase. You just need to take the first step. Whatever kitchen you're standing in, whatever age you are, whatever trauma you're recovering from, whatever dream you've set aside, it's not too late. Your grandmother's recipes, your passion, your second chance, your new beginning, they're all still there, waiting for you to reach for them. The question is, will you? Rebecca Morgan did. And at 51 years old, standing in the bakery she built from nothing, she's never been happier. The oven hums. The smell of cinnamon fills the air. Customers line up at her counter. Her employees laugh together in the back. And somewhere, her grandmother Elena is smiling. This was her story of starting over. What will yours be?